Hi guys and welcome back. Today I'm working on Inktober pieces. I'm actually working on 2 today because I have a Halloween convention coming up, which is awesome and really exciting. But it does mean that I need to make up a couple Inktober pieces before I get there because I will not be able to get those done while I'm there. Anyways, I do want to give a huge thank you to the sponsor of today's video, that's Skillshare. I love Skillshare. I always say that because I really genuinely do. There are thousands upon thousands of classes there that focus on creative endeavors in a lot of different forms. So it's really inspiring whether you're looking for something directly related to illustration or art, or whether you want something that can just help infuse your life with a little bit more creativity to it. But today I did focus on learning from one specific class that was the perfect tie-in for Inktober. It's called Ink Drawing Techniques, Brush, Nib, and Pen Style. And it has so much content there. They talk about mediums and textures and approaches to using inks. It's just extremely comprehensive. So that was really enjoyable for me to be able to go back over it and study what she had to teach and learn new things. I do actually have a coupon code link down in the description that'll give you 2 months free, so you can check it out. You can watch this class just in time for Inktober and get some insight like I did. But yeah, I learned a lot about different approaches to ink and ink textures. So let's go ahead and talk about this piece, or both of these pieces really. They are spread, like I said, so it goes from one to the next. They're both the same scene. I wanted to get several different textures in this one specifically. I'd really like to push more textures moving forward also in my Inktober pieces, but some of the specific areas that I was focusing on is there is the angel statue, which is mostly over on the left piece, and then it continues over onto the right piece as well behind the character. So that would be made of stone. I also had another wall that was basically kind of a rock texture, but I wanted it to be a different value and a different texture as well from the angel so that it would really have contrast and it would stand out. I did not want those grouped together. And then I also have the trees, which is mostly untextured except for the vertical approach to the shadows that I would have eventually when I wash it. But I also wanted to have a little bit of the natural ink texture that I could achieve that is overlaid over all of the background. So there are a lot of things that I was thinking about as I was approaching this piece. And it was actually really fun to be able to think about different ways that I could make different areas pop. Like always, or at least almost always, I made sure that I went in and did a little value study before I started this. It is so extremely helpful. There's been so many times where I had like a thought in my head and then I paint it out and I realized that everything is very mid-toned and it doesn't have the contrast or the punch that it needs. And then it becomes easy to be able to lighten areas and darken areas in that little tiny value study. That way I can know exactly how I need to fix it so that it has that impact. And this piece was exactly like that. I did one pass with my little value thumbnail and it had basically everything in the background was really mushing together, and I do want the background to be pretty closely related value wise. I didn't want there to be a lot of difference, there we go, between the lights and the darks, because they are in the background and I do want them grouped together, but I didn't want them nearly as muddled as they were in that first value study that I did. So being able to do that and seeing that first approach that I had would not have been enough was so helpful. So then I did another one and I was realizing that I needed to deepen some of the darker areas of the background. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit and talk about texture again. So that first wash that I did on the background, where I went over everything from the statue back, so those 2 stone ledges and the trees in the background, I made sure that I did everything that I could to make sure that it textured and created this really broken up, rich look to it. I love being able to do this because it allows me to do all of these things that you absolutely shouldn't be doing if you want to make sure that you get a really smooth wash. So it's like all these lessons that I learned and then realized, oh, well, if I do the opposite, then I get this effect that I also really like. So for example, when you're doing a smooth wash, what you do is you lay it down carefully and you build it up, and you never go back to an area that you already touched because it's already started to dry a certain amount. And if you go back to an area that's not 100% wet still, then it'll create a blossom. So if I want there to be a blossom, then I get to go back to areas that are damp but just a little bit dry, and I can drop back in darker values or even just clear water, and it creates those really beautiful blossom effects. And I just really love being able to continue working on a wash throughout the entirety of the drying process, which is really fun because it's something that when I'm working on just like normal watercolors and I want to get that smooth wash again, I have to be very straightforward and get it done and let it dry, and then I can touch it again. And this just feels way more immersive to work on it this way. And then just to build up the values for the background, I think I did 3 or 4, maybe it was only 3 washes where I went over around and I avoided the closest trees and I painted over the farthest trees in the background. And then the next layer I did the even farther trees and branches and the background where there are no trees. And then finally I did one darker layer that went around all of the trees, and that gives it this diminishing effect so that the trees look like they're fading off and getting darker as they get farther into the woods. And now I'm getting to my favorite part of this painting, actually, and that was creating the texture for the statue. So at the beginning, I wanted to focus on making sure that the values were still directing the eye where I wanted it to be. So what I mean by that is that the statue is taking up a very significant portion of this piece, and since she's made of one piece of stone, I didn't want to break it apart by values and have different sections, different values, to make sure that the eye goes where I want it to. So I decided that I wanted to give a darker value to the bottom of the statue, and then really roughly actually transition up to a lighter area at the top, because I wanted the focal point to be her face. Of course, I wanted that point to be where when you look at this piece, everything points the eye back up to it and leads it up. So I did make sure that it was darker on the bottom and it has that lift to it as it gets lighter towards her face. I did build that up over a few different washes and texture applications to help build that and make it a little bit stronger. I also made sure that I pushed certain areas farther back with shadow than I normally would necessarily do for a local value that's much lighter, if that makes sense. So for some of them, I wanted to make sure that they, like on the background cape, I wanted to really push it back so that it didn't all end up dark gray, but more there was a shadow that was dark gray, and that helped push off her body from the cloak behind her, and that helps it just not be quite so monotonous. And again, it helps lead the eye back up to the face because that section of shadow is kind of pointing right up towards her face. And for most of the texture in the stone area, I just took this really fluffy mop brush that I have, and I dipped it straight down into one of the darker wells of ink that I had mixed up, or ink washes, I should say. There we go. And then I took the brush and just right straight down onto the paper. I dabbed the bristles, that way it had this like stippling effect so that it would look like stone. I also took a paper towel and dabbed up on certain areas when I did that so that I could lift up and have some stippling lighter and other areas darker, and I just built it up over time with that kind of a technique. I also used, I think, a smaller brush that had a similar spread of bristles where it had kind of this fluffy effect to it, and then I went into tighter areas of the statue, that way they weren't all the same scale of stipples. And then I moved on to the hooded figure. This specific character shows up on at least 3 of my pieces, actually. I wanted this like hidden, obscured character that reoccurs every once in a while, and I chose at the beginning to do a white hoodie on the character because I knew that the theme for this piece, or for all of the pieces I should say, for Inktober, is basically night, so I wanted the backgrounds to get darker and richer as the time went on. So I knew that I wanted that figure to be able to stand out value-wise in every single piece, and I knew that that was one that would really help push it. And I chose to have the main body of the value for the hood to be pure white, the paper white, and then to be a little bit more light-handed with where the shadows would be. That way it could remain the main focal point of whatever piece it ends up being in. I did end up giving a very light ink wash on top of that statue area that's behind the hooded figure. That way there was no area on the statue that was pure white, so that that hooded figure still ended up being the highest point in the value system on this piece. And don't forget to check out Skillshare if you're interested. There is that code down in the description for the 2 months free. I also have a link to my shop, which has hopefully most of my Inktober pieces there by now. I also have a link to my Patreon, which is where all of the other videos that aren't ending up here on YouTube are going for all of my Inktober pieces. If you want more Inktober content, that is a great way to go and get that. And it's available for everyone, whether you're $1 or up. Also, this is just a little reminder, but I will be turning all of my Inktober pieces into one cohesive Inktober book, just like the last 2 years, and I'm really excited about where the direction of this one's going. So it will be on Kickstarter just like the last 2 times, and I'll give you guys more information as we get closer to when it's going to launch, but just so you know, it's coming up. Anyways, that's it for today. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.